I too would like to take this opportunity to welcome the committee's report and to extend my thanks to the convener, Bruce Crawford, the committee members, the clerks and the committee advisers for what I think we all agree is a very thorough piece of work. This has been a significant exercise, and it is important that this Parliament is an effective forum to oversee how changes to the devolution settlement are implemented, and I think the committee has manifestly fulfilled its scrutiny obligation. I have to say, looking at the report, Mr Crawford, I felt quite nostalgic and missing my presence on your committee. But, Deputy Presiding Officer, above all, it is important that our constitutional direction is a matter of building consensus rather than being politically divisive. And in that vein, I do pay tribute to the work of my fellow commissioners in the Smith Commission and, of course, Lord Smith of Kelvin himself, who, presented with a demanding schedule, as Jackie Baillie said, worked together to create a scheme of more powers that all parties represented in this chamber could agree upon. And now we are faced with the work of translating these statements of principle into legislation. It's now for us in the Scottish Parliament and for the UK Parliament to, in the words of the committee, provide constructive commentary on this process. We must ensure that the Smith Commission agreement is effectively brought forward, recognising both the spirit and the letter of the agreement itself, as both Bruce Crawford and the Cabinet Secretary have said. In that, I feel the committee has functioned very effectively, but of course this has two sides to it, and if I'm permitted the indulgence of the Chamber, I'm not surprisingly pleased that a Conservative majority was obtained a fortnight ago. We have a UK government in place that has implementing the Commission's proposals as an absolute priority, and these commitments will form an important part of the Queen's speech next week. But this is just the beginning of the process of bringing forward a new effective Scotland Act that will make this Chamber, this Parliament, one of the most powerful devolved legislators in the world. I'd rather make progress, if you don't mind. Time is tight. It is in the interests of both the UK and Scottish governments that the legislation reflects the Smith Agreement. And to that end, I'm sure the committee's views will be extremely useful, indeed cogent, in informing the work of the UK government as the bill progresses. But this is also a time, Deputy Presiding Officer, to reflect further on broader issues. And in that respect, it seems to me that the Scottish government reflects three positions in Scotland's constitutional future. The first, that the Smith Commission's recommendations be implemented and implemented as a priority, is something that we can all agree upon. The second, independence for Scotland and leaving the United Kingdom, is an argument that many in this chamber will reject, and it was roundly defeated in the referendum last year. But the third, of more powers beyond the Smith Commission recommendations, is more fluid. Now, some will feel that that option is still inadequate. Some will feel that that option is too much. But many, Deputy Presiding Officer, will at least want to explore what the Scottish Government has in mind. And both the Prime Minister and the new Secretary of State have met with the Scottish Government and have said they will listen to their views in this area. And I think that is a constructive approach. My question is when and in what format proposals in this area will be set out by the Scottish Government. Now, Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm not simply asking for a restatement of the SNP's proposals to the Smith Commission, because within that process and the call for evidence, we saw enormous opposition raised to some of the suggestions, such as the devolution of corporation tax, because in that regard concerns are raised not just from business groups but from bodies like the STUC, the Scotch Whisky Association, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Scotland and the Chartered Institute of Taxation. So with little likelihood of building any sort of consensus around these sorts of proposals, I think it is important that if the Scottish Government intends to outline areas for further attention in devolution, they ought to be realistic and evidence-based. So I think it would be a constructive contribution to any ongoing discussion for the Scottish Government to lay out what power, short of independence, it seeks, and also to indicate a framework for procurement of evidence and engagement with Civic Scotland. There are some signs of positive change, and it seems that the SNP, or at least some within the party, have recognised the instability of the full fiscal autonomy which they once supported. I understand their new MP for East Lothian, for example, has said that, and I quote, "Fiscal autonomy without inbuilt UK-wide fiscal balancing would be tantamount to economic suicide." Deputy Presiding Officer, fiscal balancing, that pooling and sharing of resources that we spoke of during the referendum, is a vital component not only of a common currency area, but of the economic union endorsed last year by the Scottish people. And of course, fiscal balancing must be supported by some level of common taxation. Now, the Smith Commission was careful not to pull apart the areas that support the UK's single domestic market, and I would like to see the Scottish Government recognise these principles, that the union people voted for is more than the absolute minimum theoretically required to maintain the UK as a state. So, in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, this is a process in which the views of this chamber matter a very great deal. By moving forward in a constructive way, we have the opportunity to create an enduring settlement based on that broad consensus. A powerhouse Scottish Parliament within the United Kingdom, with responsibility for what it raises as well as for what it spends, reflecting not just the wishes of many in this chamber, but reflecting the aspirations of the Scottish people. And this interim report, Deputy Presiding Officer, I think is a very positive first step in that process.